In the status quo, many people believe that fear is an obstacle to success because they believe that fear hinders them to actually try themselves and make themselves try something new. However, in the status quo, fear is considered an emotion that makes the mind to be scared. It often pivots cautiously. It often is the factors that drive people back. Not true since it, but it is not true since it can often be the stimulus and motivation for the people. The counterfactual for our team is the government and the people wants a world where fear is not a flaw, but an emotion that can make people learn to overcome. Now let me move on to my arguments. The first argument is if there's no fear, there's much less innovation. In the status quo, fear is treated as something very negative and something that should be avoided. Avoided. For example, when a person has a lot of fear, people say that person is a coward and like look them as a bad view. However, fear is very natural and it is an emotion that everyone feels. However, fear will stimulus for people to work harder. No, because since we have fear, we can work hard. We can work harder during prep time. We work hard to make the greatest achievement possible. And also, whenever we have to face challenges, we of course have to face fear all the time. If we consider fear and this narrative as a burden and a flaw inside an individual, the attempts of trying challenges and the attempts of trying challenges and taking on adventures will decrease, ultimately leading to no innovation because people will do not try anything new. For example, a lot of inventions we use right now are made with fear. Made with fear. The second argument is fear can protect us from danger. A lot of people treat people with a lot of fear like a coward. Fear can actually help people avoid a lot of danger. Normally people usually hesitate to try something looks scary, like dangerous sports, dangerous actions, etc. The fear for those things can lead people to avoid danger because when a person wants to do a dangerous action, fear can actually stop them from doing that, which can help them avoid danger. And this can impact the people and this can impact the world by they can help people avoid dangerous actions and ultimately help people. So honorable adjudicator, you can see here that fear can be a factor that can not only save us from danger and not only help us from danger and it is not a hindrance for us making new ideas and making leading us to goals, but can also help us get more innovation and get more ideas ultimately. Therefore, the motion should stand. Thank you.
So, judge as leader of opposition in this debate for things. So, number one, definition. Number two, rebuttals. Number three, argument one, and number four, argument two. So, moving straight onto a quick version of the setup. So, our stance is that we aren't saying that the emotion fear itself is bad because it obviously prevents people from like doing reckless or dangerous things in like real situations. But pressuring people to oppose this narrative itself is bad. So, what we're trying to say in this debate is that don't be overcome with fear. At least try to do something against it. For example, if you have like a real fear against like dogs or something like that, then you can at least do something to like get closer to those animals. And step moving on to definitions. So fear is an emotion that people feel when they're afraid or like in dangerous situations. But in this narrative, we exclude trauma because that isn't an emotion, but a general severe shock or experience. So their world is a world where people are enclosed inside their own fear and live that way for their entire lives. And the target of this narrative is to overcome the fears, as it states on the info slide, like because the narrative is
Johan,
treated as yes.
how can you overcome fear if your world genuine if your world directly states that fear is a flaw and should be considered as a burden?
Well, there are other alternatives, such as like using therapists or actually going closer to what you fear. For example, if you like fear bungee jumping, then you can try from like going from high heights because you have a fear of heights. That's why you fear bungee jumping or things like that. So moving on. So their world is a world where people are just enclosed inside their fears and they can't do anything about it. And the target of this narrative to overcome the fears, as it says in the info slide. So moving straight on to rebuttal. So they talked about like fear is a natural emotion. Okay, we do agree that fear is a good, sometimes good emotion that helps people like not do like reckless things or stuff like that. But just like accepting fear as a natural emotion doesn't innovate yourself like to try something because like you have the fear of doing something wrong or like dying or getting punished or things like that. And they also said that considering fear as a burden is bad, which leads to bad innovation. But as I said before, considering fear as a burden actually helped you to like try other things that you feared before in your life. And also they talked about like helps the fear helps people avoid danger. However, again, we aren't saying that the fear itself is bad because it saves you from these situations. But like accepting fear is bad because you just like get the mindset that, oh, if I have a fear against this, then I shouldn't do this forever because I'm fearful of it. So now moving on to the arguments. The argument one is about challenges. So we believe that fear stops us from overcoming obstacles for or challenges. So three folds of reasoning here. So A, fear stops us from doing things that we want. As we grow, we face many obstacles, some easy, some fearful, and some difficult. However, the belief that fear is a national emotion and accepting this as something natural incentivizes people to let go of their hardships and back away from challenges because they know that fear is a natural emotion. For example, let's say that you really wanted to try bungee jumping, but your fear of heights stops you from trying it. So the opposite narrative stops you from overcoming this. So B, personal growth is very important as improvement is caused by people overcoming the things that they wouldn't do at first. For example, does a toddler just give up walking by himself because he's scared of falling down? No. So C, people become like too careful. So we aren't saying that the fear itself is bad, but being too careful and fearful about everything simply includes the fear of a certain thing. Now, moving on to argument two, people become too dramatic or too cautious. So why is this so? So this narrative is implied so that people will at first feel that it's normal, but but if this narrative is like opposed, it excuses all the time where people are like likely to not overcome the things that they are feared. So their fears leading to them having way too much fear and for like even minor things that they weren't fearful of before. Well, so why is this important? So the people become dramatic over minor things. They are not feeling natural emotions. This means that they're feeling false fear because of this narrative. For these reasons, I cannot be more proud to oppose.
Judge, there's one thing that the opposition had constantly ignored in their speech: narrative. Our side is where this narrative is minimal or does not exist, or people opposes it, not where there's another narrative that fears amazing. They need to prove that this narrative has more benefits than harms. Hello, I'm the Deputy Prime Minister of today's debate, and I'd like to talk about our team's final argument. Before talking about our team's final argument, I'd like to rebut the main points given out by the opposition side. So the leader of opposition's first argument is that you're going to overcome challenges, stop doing dangerous things because you are accepting fear. However, this is wrong as accepting fear is actually our side. Their side is where they feel as if like fear is a barrier. So you should ignore this fear, and because they ignore this fear, they're not gonna care. They're gonna be much more reckless than our team side because if they like don't have like because they like they believe that fear is a flaw, they're just gonna do dangerous things without as much like backups or maybe like preparations. So this argument does not stand. The leader of the leader of opposition's second argument is that the people will become too cautious or too dramatic. However, this is wrong. This is just wrong, as our counterfactual is where the narrative does not exist. So why would they suddenly just like become like super dramatic over like getting like sharpening a pencil because they think that like they're just gonna be hurt? Like this does not make sense. We're just saying that like fear, we should accept fear and we should like respond accordingly. And we're not saying that we should just constantly like add fear in basically every part of our life. So this argument does not stand as well. Now moving on to rebuilding our team's two arguments. So the Prime Minister's second argument is that fear protects us from dangerous activities. The leader of opposition rebutted it by saying that accepting fear does not actually like accepting fear does not actually help you to like protect from dangerous activities. However, I like to rebut this by saying that it does help you, as either number one, you do dangerous things way more cautiously with like way more preparations, so that you have either one, a much lower chance of like failure and a failure, and or number two, you're just not gonna do this like dangerous thing because you believe that it is way too dangerous. So this argument does not stand. So this argument still stands. Now I'd like to move on to our team's final argument, which is that you're going to be much more prepared for failure. And now, why is this argument true? So fear is not something that just prevents you from doing anything. Fear is something that increases like stress when you're actually like doing risky things because you're like fearing that you're going to fail or not going to succeed as well. But stress is not actually bad. It is actually really useful in today. This stress gives you more motive to actually prepare for fails just in case that happens because you're constantly like fearing about it. How would this preparing look like? For example, it looks like saving emergency money while trying to make a business or preparing for another major in college just in case your main major does not have many job opportunities and also many others. Now, we are not saying that this is just impossible in the opposition side, but the probability of this is super different as there's a social narrative that pressures you not to fear and try as hard and like force you to kind of try and hard as possible. You're not usually as prepared for the fail as the society usually does not expect you to do such a thing as they believe that you have to succeed sooner or later no matter how many times you fail. As many people would believe in this, the people would not a lot of people not prepare as much for fails as they would be at a very precarious situation when you do. Now, why is this important? When you prepare for the fail, you're not going to be in as bad of a situation compared to the opposition side because you either have alternative routes or a financial net to save you. This way, you can number one still have a chance to succeed in other things, or two, be in a decent position even after failing, which can even allow you to try another time in a little bit. So, what have I told you in my speech? I talked about our team's final argument and rebutted the leader of opposition team's points. For all these reasons, I'm proud to propose.
Judge, fear is something really natural. You can feel fear and you might be afraid of something. I don't think both teams can touch on this fact. So, however, we think that probably overcoming these fear is the delta of this debate. So, two things in my speech: A, clarifications, and B, rebuttals. Moving on, I hate to repeat, but this is a narrative motion. If we believe that most of the fears are going to be really small fears. For example, many people who are afraid of water overcame it after like a few times going into water, excluding cases of like trauma that like our PM like just talked about it like during your whole speech. And B, because people have some sort of pressure that God pushes, it means that people with trauma will invest in themselves, like going to like therapists, and like that itself is a positive change that will develop the society and the actor as well, because they're actually trying to invest in themselves and like trying to overcome these fears in order to make them like suitable in order to like go out of the society and do something like that, right? So now moving on to rebuttals. First category is that like does fear actually solve everything? Hey, I just think this is simply not true because even if fear is there, if fear is just something like really like casual and good and like people feel it all the time and like it's just okay to feel that fear, people don't have the incentive to fix it and challenge themselves. Also, being afraid does not mean that we'll fix that situation. For example, it's like just because you're like afraid of water, like can you actually get rid of water? No, that's not the case. So like it's you who should fix it, and it's you who should like overcome that fear in order to like become a better person and invest in yourself, right? So B, even if this is not true, we still think that fear is just like symmetric on both sides. Fear does exist here as well. I don't think that the society is too dumb enough, and they wouldn't pressure you to not be afraid of like bombs and terrorists. I think that's really uncharitable for the opposition to say that fear wouldn't be on our side as well. And like every person, if like every person is afraid of that, obviously that's not the target of this narrative. If you're afraid of things like, however, if you're like afraid of things really small, and if you believe that you can like really actually overcome that, that is the place where this
POI.
narrative targets. Yes.
How about fears that are bigger? For example, fears of trying. Would there still be a therapist to like actually help you try it if in a world where fear is considered as a burden on your side?
Okay, so I think simply this is actually called a trauma, not like a big fear. So I don't think the society is dumb enough to like actually like force people to like just overcome these traumas. Traumas are something different from fear. I think that's like a different category. And like I don't think the society will actually pressure people to like suddenly come out of traumas. That's like a really big shock, and it's not really easy. I think people know that traumas are different from fear because, like I repeated like many times, the society is not that dumb. So I want the gov to know that if that move just going back to my speech, I want the gov to know that fear and guns is not the targets of it, and if everybody is feared of that, that's not considered bad because everybody knows that like they should be afraid of it in order to like not be in order to be safe, right? So this directly means that if you want like the basic fear like that will like, actually protect you and make you still exist on our world. So this is symmetric on both sides. So see, I don't think that like a counterfactual should exist on the first place because if you look at the motion type, it's literally the opposite motion. But let's be the best opposition ever and like be terrible. Even if this is the case, we believe that fear is symmetric on both sides, like I just like repeated for like the last minute. And we believe and also like people just don't engage with this in the first place. Who would actually try to engage with like their counterfactual when everybody says fear is good, they don't have the incentive to actually become a better person. They don't have the incentive to they don't really have the incentive to develop themselves like excluding the case of trauma like I repeated before. So and like moving on, I don't think they actually like their third argument was basically about like they don't fail, but like because like I don't think they'll actually fail because like they never try. Like because they fear, they actually never try. They never even try. They never try to try, and like that's the reason why they can actually fail and like make better like development and those kind of stuff. So for all these reasons, I can never remember proud to oppose.
My speech, rebuttals, weighing, and clashes. So beginning with the rebuttals, opposition's whole case is based on the assumption that society is not dumb. I also do not get how this is achievable nor possible in the status quo in a world where fear is still considered as a burden. People who have fear are flawful people who are not skilled, who do not have much ability. So opposition constantly mentions that they have alternative. They can use therapists. Like trauma and fear is not much different. That is exactly why our case is way better and more feasible than opposition's case. So in in the status quo, as our PM has clearly mentioned in his in his framing, it is like fear is anything that can cause harm and fear and scariness, I would say. Which means that fear does not just include heights, fear of heights, fear of water. It also includes the barriers that exist inside one individual's minds to stop them from trying, stop them from doing something new. So in the opposition's world, like people will not try, people will not do anything because if fear is an emotion that will naturally come when they do something new. Oh no, thank you. When fear is in place, society in opposition world, society will view them as flawful people, which stops them from doing anything new in the first place, and will not try to get help because they will not want to uh become a flawful people that person that has fear. Moving on to weighing, there are two main metrics in this debate, mental impacts to individuals and social impacts. So in opposition's world, fear itself, people will avoid new attempts because new tries involve fear, but society views fear as a burden and as a flaw. Individuals will always question themselves, thinking that they are wrong and going towards the wrong path, even though
You know why?
oftentimes their path might be correct. No, thank you. Society is blocking individuals from taking adventures, making them take the easy path that has no improvements. There will be obviously no innovation in their world. As society, we have no improvements, bringing society negative impacts. But in our world, since fear is an emotion that is encouraged to overcome, people will try new things more often, leading more to positive impacts to individuals, more innovation. Before moving on to my classes, I'll accept your PR.
Because it's like a burden, wouldn't they actually try to like invest in themselves and then innovate?
Okay, if it's a burden in your world, it's literally society would think that, oh, you have fear, you have no ability, you're flawful, because fear itself is considered as a flaw. People will never try anything new because society, no matter what they try to do, society will think that, oh, you have fear, you're skillless, and you're flawful. This is not like opposition constantly mentions that like they have alternatives. They have no. This is not true because people will be looked down upon when they have fear, preventing them from doing anything new. Moving on to clashes, the clash in this debate is that role of fear, how it impacts individuals. So in opposition's world, where fear is treated as an obstacle and something to get rid of, and it's a burden, people avoid things that are due since they're scared that society will look down upon them. They will not be accepted as part of society. However, in our world, fear is a stimulus. It is motivation that drives people forward, giving them more energy. People will want to improve and innovate using fear, meaning that it will have a positive impact on both the individual and the society, because the individual will improve trying to do something new, and society will improve due to the innovation and skill of the individual that comes along. None of this is possible in the opposition world, so our side takes the clash. So side up, government takes the debate home, because we're we are the side that actually helps society and the individual progress. Proud to propose.
This motion clearly states that fear is like a burden or something, not trauma. Trauma is fear is something you can overcome by yourself, and trauma is something you probably need a therapist for. And I think opposition is confusing these two. So before moving on to my questions, I'd like to do some rebuttal. I like to do some rebuttals. So because you have fear and you don't want to be a bad person, won't you try to not have fear? Won't you just try not to have fear? So moving on to some class. So moving on to classes. So first class is fear versus dramatic people. They tell you about fear is natural, and we tell you about people will become too dramatic. I like to write this under the metric of effectiveness. In the effectiveness in the future, they tell you fear is natural, and we tell you about they tell you that fear is natural, and it will become a burden. We tell you that people will be scared about minor things and doesn't help you with personal growth. Yes, fear is natural, but just at the end, you're going to have to overcome this fear. For example, you have to
Yo,
fear.
I
For example, if you have a fear of growing up, just a moment. For example, if you have a fear of public speaking, but once for example, you have a fear of public speaking, but once you grow up, you'll have to do something. You'll have to overcome this fear. As maybe your job, as for your job, maybe you have to you'll have to do like a presentation. Even though fear is natural, we believe it's worth it to give some kind of natural, give risk some kind of not risk some natural emotion, because if they don't risk this natural emotion, they aren't going to grow. Just they're gonna grow mentally. They're not gonna grow as human, because fear is something natural and fear is something we should overcome. I like to take your POI.
how can you overcome fear in your society where society looks down upon people who have fear and prevents like any chance of opportunity?
So I don't really know what you mean, because we literally both our previous speakers explained to you clearly why this fear doesn't become a doesn't become a doesn't become a burden. There's not much also there's not much engagement coming from opposition side. We clearly see them kind of like trying to we see them kind of ignoring all of our previous speaker rebuttals, and they ignore the fact that we tell you that trauma and fear are two completely different things. And he's so continuing on. So at the end of the day, I think that fear being like a natural sure, fear is a natural emotion, but at the end of the day, it'll be something you have to it'll be something you have to risk for some at least kind of personal growth, because fear is very no fear is very no because fear is very normal, and if you don't feel fear, then you probably won't grow. And also this is Also the opposition. I don't think the opposition side is actually kind of caring that, and and because and so at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, fear is. I don't think fear being natural actually matters when fear actually matter. I don't think fear actually matters at the end of the day. At the end of the day, or at least it doesn't matter more than people being coming too dramatic or for people's future. For these reasons, never been so proud to oppose. Sure. So, Judge, our world is a world where people look down upon people who have fear. So, that is the complete reason why people would try to overcome their fear to fit into the society, to become someone who doesn't have a fear and look flawless. So, the proposition has completely ignored all of their reasonings for the past minutes of the debate. Now, moving on to the best and worst case comparison scenario. So, now let's compare the government best case and our worst case. So our worst case is a world where people do reckless things or aren't incentivized to innovate themselves, because obviously fear is an emotion that stops people from doing reckless things or like something that actually like makes the people go like forward or things like that. True, fear of truly reckless dangerous things are something that both sides cannot touch because that is a natural instinct from old times. However, do the things that we fear disappear just because you fear them? No, that isn't the case in this debate. So the only visible solution in this debate to overcome the fear yourself, because obviously just because you're fearing those things don't disappear. It is up to you to solve that problem, and you are the only one who can propose that solution. So this case still stands. The proposition talked about like fear creating innovation and creates protection. Now let's compare this to our worst case. So doesn't innovation actually exist on our side because the government side doesn't have a burden, so they have no challenges. So why does this drive people forward or like create innovations? Because obviously most inventions were caused by convenience not fear. And on the other hand, our side still has the incentive to fit into the society and overcome their fear to become a good person who goes alongside the narrative, not against the narrative. Now moving on to their worst case. So they clearly don't have innovation because what logic does living inside fear help you go forward when there's no visible incentive to do so? Our world is a world where people look down upon fear, where people would overcome their fear to not look like a weak person who has a lot of fears. So at the end of the day, we believe that not so we believe that having the narrative that fear is a flaw is good for people because it innovates people to like overcome their fear and overcome their flaws. So for these reasons, I cannot be more proud to oppose.
Judge, they didn't respond to the fact that normal people does not get scared to anything in life until the very end, and they just assume that they just fear almost everything. Hello, I'm the government reply of today's debate, and I'd like to talk about step by step about how our team has already won today's debate. So firstly, I'd like to talk about the largest part of today's debate, largest part slash clash of today's debate, which was about success. So in this clash, the government side has supported this by saying that we prepare more and try much later to increase the chances of success, and the opposition has said that people will accept fear and try much more as they're not fearful. And in this thing, our side has already won because the deputy prime minister has already said that you're not going to accept fear, instead ignore it, which has not been countered by the later speakers. And also our side has also been rebutted, but countered by the prime minister, already countered by the prime minister by saying that our counterfactual is where there's no societal pressure. We have to avoid fear, not where there's there's not where there's another separate narrative that there like we have to there's a narrative that we should we should not view that fear is awesome. So now moving on, the unanswered parts of the opposition's teams are the major questions unanswered is number one, that there's less innovation in the opposition side because there's pressure to succeed, so many don't try because of pressure. And number two, the preparation clash by the whip speaker, and they just said that you're still going to fail, which is not the actual clash at all. So to summarize, I'd like to talk about our team's
to summarize, I'd like to talk about the role comparison. So, firstly, our team side is where the people prepare more and also build safer backup plans. So the people are going to have higher chances of success, and even if they don't succeed, there will be backup plans just in case you fail. And the opposition side is where there'd be less successful innovations because people are pressured just to succeed, not prepare for failure nor success, and the society won't be able to grow as quickly as on our side. So whatever I told you in my speech, I talked about our teams. I said that talked about how our team has already won today's debate. For all these reasons, I'm proud to propose.